these studies on different individuals in the Bible, and I don't know. When I was looking at what we're doing on Sunday morning with Peter's life and looking at Simon Peter and learning from him, and I told Candace I've enjoyed that very much, but I'm really this past Sunday was one of my. I was really looking forward to getting to that, and then I'm really looking forward to getting to the next few sermons in that series. But I have a notebook, and in it I'll have series ideas, and I'll have stars and asterisks beside them, and write and dwell on those things. And ever since I was called to preach a few years ago now, I've wanted to take a look and do a character study on King David, and for a few reasons. In this is won't be our text this evening, but in Acts chapter 13, verse 22, we read this. Luke writes this: "And when he had removed him, he raised up unto them David to be their king, to whom also he gave testimony and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after mine own heart, which shall fulfill all my will." David is an interesting character in the Bible, just as Peter is very interesting. David, not because I was named after him, but King David to me is one of those very, very interesting people. He is chosen at a young age to be king. And though he is anointed to be king, that's what we'll look at this evening, he just returns to tending sheep that same day. And then God takes him from herding sheep to playing the harp for Saul, the man that he's going to replace, the man that God said, I have rejected Saul. But God allowed Saul to continue to reign as David grew in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. And then several places in Scripture, David is called a man after God's own heart, not just where we read in Acts there, but several places. David is known as a man after God's own heart. And as we look at David and we get into later portions of his life, we'll see that that seems almost like an oxymoron. How can he be a man after God's own heart and still do such evil things? And how can he seek God's will so diligently in his life and still not be allowed to build the temple because God calls him, quote, a man of war, and there's too much blood on his hands? I used to joke with my father. My father pastored for over 47 years. He pastored, started to work in Lewis County, Kentucky, and he was the pastor there. He was an assistant pastor before that, but then he started working in Lewis County, Kentucky. He was a pastor there. And they had an old building, had a building fund, and they started to save money, and they bought property, and they had blueprints printed, and then God called him away from Faith Baptist Church and sent him to Salem Baptist Church before the building was built. Pastor Tim Underwood led the church to build the building. Dad gathered all the materials. Dad gathered all the things, all the money, but he didn't get to build it, just like King David didn't get to build the temple. And then he was at Salem Missionary Baptist Church. They had a beautiful building there. It was pretty new. It was only about 10 years old. And they wanted to build a gym. Same thing. Dad spoke to the church. They got blueprints. They spoke to contractors. They had everything ready. And then Dad called him to Hyco, West Virginia, where he pastored. Now, I told my father later in life, I said, Dad, you are not allowed to build a temple for God because you're a man of war. There's too much blood on your hands. But that's what we see about King David. So we're going to look at King David over the next several Wednesday nights because we're going to just take a deep dive and look at him. But this evening, as we always do, we're going to begin at the beginning, and we're going to look at how God chooses a king, how he chooses anyone to serve him. How does God choose? How does God choose anyone to serve him in any capacity? I look out here, and there are several people, and they have several different things where they serve, whether it be coordinating with other churches, doing things with them, doing things in multimedia, doing things at the schools and the high school, doing things door to door and in the community. I mean, we have a lot of different people sitting here and a lot of different people serving a lot of different ways. How did God choose you to do that? God chose you to do that. He called you to do that. You're doing that. How does he choose? So this evening, I think it's very interesting here in 1 Samuel. And it's a very familiar tale. And this is a series that I almost preached about a year and a half ago. As you can tell, it's been on my mind for a long time. About a year and a half ago, and I messed myself up because I preached a couple sermons about David haphazardly, and I was like, well, I can't do that. I'm going to retread. So now I think it's been long enough since I preached on David, and God's led us to this evening. But look with me in 1 Samuel chapter 16. We'll begin reading in verse 1. And the Lord said unto Samuel, how long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thine horn with oil and go. I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. And Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hear it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, take an heifer with thee, and said, I am come to sacrifice to the Lord. And call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show thee what thou shalt do, and thou shalt anoint unto me him whom I name unto thee. And Samuel did that which the Lord spake, and came to Bethlehem. And the elders of the town trembled at his coming, and said, comest thou peaceably? The man of God was respected so much in this time that when he rolled into the town, the people got scared that somebody was going to get some judgment bestowed upon them. When he walked in and he showed up at Bethlehem, Bethlehem is just a very small, out-of-the-way village. It's no massive metropolis. It's not Jerusalem. It's not Jericho. It's not even Samaria. Bethlehem would be the Gallipolis ferry of its time. You know, people there would not think that the prophet would come. It would be like President Trump saying, I'm going to go to Gallipolis Ferry, and I'm going to be at Beale School. People will say, what's happening? What's going on? So he shows up in Bethlehem, and Samuel did that which the Lord spake. He came to Bethlehem. The elders of the town trembled at his coming and said, comest thou peaceably? And he said, peaceably. I'm come to sacrifice unto the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his sons and called them to the sacrifice. And it came to pass that when they were come, he looked at Eliab and said, surely the Lord's anointed is before me. And the Lord said unto Samuel, look not on his countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him to pass before Samuel. And he said, neither hath the Lord chosen this. And Jesse made Shammah to pass. And he said, neither hath the Lord chosen this. And again, Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel. And Samuel said unto Jesse, the Lord hath not chosen these. And Samuel said unto Jesse, are here all thy children? And he said, there remaineth yet the youngest. And behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, send and fetch him, for he will not sit down till he come hither. And he sent and brought him in, and now was ruddy and withal a beautiful countenance and goodly to look at. The Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. How God chooses. If you'll remember back in the beginning of Samuel, 1 Samuel, the children of Israel had been reigned as a theocracy. God himself reigned the children of Israel. He was their king. They had no king. And then there was the great speech where they said, give us a king. And so they anointed Saul. Saul, who was this tall, strapping man, the Bible tells us that he was handsome and he was head and shoulders above the rest. He was a big, brooding, good-looking man. It made sense that he would be king. It was kind of like when John F. Kennedy was elected president. When John F. Kennedy debated Richard Nixon, it was the first nationally televised live presidential debate. Did you know that? Did you know JFK didn't have to say anything in that debate? All he had to do was stand there and look pretty, and he had already whipped ugly Richard Nixon. And that's the fact. You can ask sociologists, why did Nixon lose to Kennedy the first time? It's because Kennedy looked like a president and Nixon looked like a substitute math teacher. And that's why he won. I mean, he was articulate. It made sense. He looked presidential. You put somebody pretty on TV and they get things that they normally wouldn't get. Saul looked like a king. So that's how Saul came to be in power. And then Saul, of course, he did everything wrong, and he finally crossed the final line. The straw that broke the camel's back is when he sacrificed. He had no business sacrificing. He was not of the tribe of Levi. He was not a priest. He was not the prophet. He sacrificed anyways, and God said, that's it, I'm done. I'm done. I've rejected Saul. So he sends Samuel to go pick another king, and Samuel goes to Bethlehem. He says, Saul will kill me if he finds out. God said, go and sacrifice. He'll never question you if you're sacrificing in a small town like Bethlehem. Just take you a cow, kill the cow, sacrifice. So he goes there to pick a king. How did God choose? How did God choose David? Well, let's look at God's choice, and that's what we want to focus on this evening. First thing you have to understand is God's choices are sovereign. He is sovereign. God is all powerful. He rules and reigns everything. Now, whenever you say the word sovereign, the first thing some people come to mind is they'll think, oh, you're a sovereign grace church. That means you're a Calvinist, hard shell type of Baptist. You believe in. I believe in the sovereignty of God. I believe in the power of God. I believe God knows all things at all times. He's God. You can't escape God's sight because God already knows what's happening. And I believe in the sovereign God. His choices are sovereign. He reigns on high. His choice involves sovereign providence. Now, I want you to understand that against all this backdrop of rebellion and rejection of God, God is already knows who he wants to be king. There's a sovereign providence that has already been taking place. We call it the providential hand of God moves. And the providential hand of God moves, and he guides to where you're going. It's just like whenever you're driving up the road, say when you're kindergarten age, maybe. No, maybe not even that. Yeah, I might have been in kindergarten. We were driving up the road and we were in a car wreck. I think I told you the story. We were in a car wreck on our way to see family on Christmas Day. And car looked terrible. We looked terrible, but we were fine. And we stopped at the gas station. We drove on up to Indiana to see my mom's family. And as we were driving, you're in a bad mood whenever you're in a car wreck. But as we were driving, we heard on the radio that there had been like a 12-car pileup ahead of us. God's providential hand protected us and pushed us in to the bulldozer so that we wouldn't die in the pileup. Because I think 10 people died in that crash that we avoided. You see, God's sovereignty, his choice involves sovereign providence to get you to his plan. His choice involves sovereign planning. So there is providence that pushes and there is planning involved. One of David's ancestors was a woman named Rahab. Do you remember Rahab? Rahab, what was she? She was a harlot. Rahab the harlot. Then we see in Judges 2 that she was saved out of idolatry after she left Jericho when the walls came tumbling down, and she was saved and she was brought into the nation of Israel, and she married a devout man named Solomon. And Solomon was a devout Jewish man, and they birthed a child. And then that child became Boaz. And then Boaz married Ruth, and then Ruth begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David. You see, God had a plan in place. When Rahab was just a harlot on the wall, God knew that she would be in the lineage of David. God wasn't surprised that the harlot, everybody else might have been like, man, did you know that Jesse's great-great-grandma was a harlot? Everybody else was surprised, but God had a plan. He had a sovereign plan. His choice involves sovereign providence, which guides, and it involves a sovereign plan. If God is guiding, he's guiding somewhere. He's not just going willy-nilly. There is a plan in place, and that is where he is guiding to that plan. And then his choice involves sovereign power. I want you to notice these words in our text, what God says. God says, I have chosen. I have. He has the power to have. A lot of people have dreams and plans, and a lot of people try to have their own providence as they move towards something and plan towards something. But God's sovereign power ensures that his plans will come to pass because he's God. If we say he is omnipresent and he's omnipotent, if he's all powerful, all knowing, if he is these things, then he has the power to bring off any plan he wants to bring off. I have a lot of plans. I don't have a lot of power to get those plans done. I have a lot of things that I feel like I'm trying to providentially move towards and plan towards, but I don't have the power to get them done. God does. So you understand that in God's choosing, his choices are sovereign. He is all powerful. And so his plans are the only plans that matter. That's what he says when he says, I know my thoughts that I have for you, thoughts of good and not of evil, thoughts to prosper you and bring you to what? An haphazard end. No, an expected end. God's never surprised when someone dies. God's never surprised when someone's born. God's never surprised when someone says, I'm pregnant. God's like, ooh, now what am I going to do? God knows these things because he's everywhere at once and he's at all time, all the times. God is eternal. He is much higher than us. And so his plans are brought about and his choices are sovereign. You have to understand these things. There are no accidents in life. God is well able to bring his plan to pass, and God's sovereign choices extend into every area of our lives. Every area. Now, Pastor David, does that mean you believe that people don't have a choice to either going to be saved or not? You have a choice. But God knows what choice you're going to make. You see, that's the thing. People want to argue about the sovereignty of God, and they want to sit around and say, oh, people predestined to heaven, they're predestined to hell, blah, 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 blah. Those are upper management decisions that you don't really need to involve yourself with. That's just something stupid people decided they're going to sit around and argue about rather than spread the saving gospel of Jesus Christ. It's not for us to decide. It's for God to decide. I like John MacArthur, one of the greatest theological minds of our time. God took him home to be with heaven. I think that this earth was no longer worthy of John MacArthur, and that's why God took him home, to be honest with you. God took John MacArthur home, and I love to listen to John MacArthur speak, and I love to read every word he's ever written. And John MacArthur, one time, he would allow his church to question him after service, which I think is brave. And somebody was asking him about the sovereignty of God. They said, do people have the choice to be saved? Yes. Are people predestined to go to hell? No. Does God know who's going to be saved? Yes. They said, can you explain that? You know what he said? No. He said, I'm not God, and neither are you. Neither was Calvin or whoever else you want to follow. It's what we try to do and shove God into our human box, and we cannot do it. It is not ours to know. It is ours to preach the gospel to every creature. It is ours to evangelize the world. It is not ours to know what God knows, because we can never know what God knows. He is sovereign, and we are not. God's choices are sovereign, but God's choices are always surprising. Look with me in verse 6 through 13. We'll see this. First off, look with me in verse 6 through 10. And it came to pass when they were come, and he looked at Eliab, and he said, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said unto Samuel, look not on his countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. We would do well to remember that when we see the biker that loves Jesus and reads his Bible more than you do, and we look down our long, pious nose at him. Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel and said, neither hath the Lord chosen this. Then Jesse made Shammah to pass, and he said, neither hath the Lord chosen this. Again, Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel, and Samuel said unto Jesse, the Lord hath not chosen these. God's choices are surprising. Why? His choice is surprising in his rejections. Whenever Samuel laid eyes on these other older sons, he thought, surely God has chosen this one. It's surprising in his rejections, who is not chosen, who he does not use in this place as king. It's surprising who he chooses, but his choice is surprising in those that he rejects. All you have to do is look at what the names of these men mean that went before the prophet that was rejected. Look at the first one. When we look in verse 6, Eliab. Eliab, his name means God is Father. Surely he would be a great king. His name even means God is Father. But God said no. He refused. What that word refuse means, it simply means to reject. Eliab might have looked pleasing outwardly, but something in his character disqualified him from being king. It didn't matter how he looked, how he held himself, or even what his name meant. He was rejected because he was not who God wanted. Abinadab was next. Abinadab, what does his name? My father is noble. Surely he is king. His name even says, my father is noble. That's what his name means. God says, no, I've rejected him too. I do not want him either. He's pushed aside to be king. And then we have Shammah. The name means astonishment, to be astonished. I'd imagine Shammah was a mountain of a man. He probably looked like he was cut out of granite. His name literally meant astonishment. He was astonishing to look at. He was probably good looking. He was probably ruggedly handsome. He was probably, when he walked up, he was like, man, this is the guy. That's the guy. I often joke with Candace, she chose me, and I'm not the mountain of the man you see before you today. I weighed 160 pounds soaking wet, and I couldn't grow a beard back then. Just had a little nasty peach fuzz on my chin. And of all the handsome men that walked before her, she said, that's the one I'm going to marry. I always say my wife is brilliant and beautiful, but she has terrible taste in men. But these walked before him, and how surprising are the rejections that these are rejected. These were all fine physical specimens. Their physiques had been refined and toned by hours of hard labor in the fields and working for their father Jesse. Any one of them would have possessed the physical requirements to turn heads and rule as king, but none of them possessed the right character and character traits. Now, I say that we do need to remember this today in the local New Testament church. How many times, now you be honest, about Phil, how many times there's some kid coming up in the youth group, and man, he's handsome. He's tall, strapping, well-spoken, smells good. The girls love him. The boys want to be him. We look at him and say, boy, he'll be a great pastor one day. Do we ever look at the little zitty face pipsqueak who hasn't had his growth spurt yet, and his hair's all a mess, and he smells funny, and we look at him and say, well, he's going to be a great pastor one? No, we don't. We do this too. We look at the kid that was raised in a deacon's home by a deacon who has a wonderful mother and a wonderful father, has all the pedigrees. He's well educated. He is well liked. He is well respected by his peers. We're going to say that's going to be the next deacon at Faith Gospel Church. Do we not? How many times do we look at the kid that comes wandering in off the street that nobody takes any interest in and say, that's going to be the next deacon of Faith Gospel Church? We do the same thing, don't we? We look at pedigrees. Hey, they even do it to pastors. One of the first things that pastors ask me, where'd you go to Bible college? Did you go to Bob Jones? Did you go to Liberty? Yeah, and they kind of know if they like you or not. Are you a Jack Hyles man? No, I'm a Bible man. I was raised in the home of a pastor and sat at the feet of some of the greatest pastors that God ever set on the face of the planet. That's where I learned. But that's what they ask. Oh, that's a good kid. We do the same thing. We do the exact same thing. You see, the rejections are surprising. If God would have looked as we look, he would have chosen the first one or the second one or the man whose name literally means astonishing. We would have chosen any of them. But his rejections are surprising. His choice is surprising in its requirements. God tells Samuel that he does not look on the physical attributes of a man. God looks at the character of a man's heart. You see, before Saul ever ceased to be king, God had already determined to raise up a man with the right kind of heart. In 1 Samuel 13:14, God says that I will bring me a man that has a man after mine own heart. It's one of the first times that you see David referred to as a man after God's own heart. You see that in 1 Samuel 13:14. I'll turn back there quickly. Let's see what this says. 1 Samuel 13 and verse 14. You don't have to turn there. It says this. But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man, quote, after his own heart. And the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. This is when God takes Saul behind the woodshed and whips him, and he says, I'm done with you. You're no longer my chosen king. You see, the surprising requirement was this. He didn't have to have the right pedigree. He didn't have to have the right looks. He didn't have to have the right education. He didn't have to have the right physique or leadership qualities. God said, give me the man that has the heart. That's what I want. That's the requirement. His choice is surprising in its requirements. When we're looking at presidential candidates, what do? We say we don't, but we do. We look and see what party are they? Are they a Democrat or a Republican? Well, where did they go to school? Well, how much money do they have? Are they successful? How many times did they go bankrupt? When do we look at them and say, are they saved by the grace of God? Does their worldview line up with the Bible more than the other guy? You see, the requirements, they're surprising. God's requirements are surprising. And if you look at David, and we look at David and these others as we go on in 1 Samuel 17, we see that the first that passed before Eliab, who seems so impressive, we find out that he's a petty, jealous, little negative punk. That's what we find out later in 1 Samuel 17:28. We find out that he would have been a terrible king. But at first glance, he would have won our vote. You see, this is a lesson that the church needs to learn today. When we look at leaders, we often seek those who possess certain characteristics that we think spell success and ability. We look for people of influence, power, intelligence, and means. God, however, looks for people of integrity and character. You know, one of my favorite things when a church is looking for a new pastor. Now, I'm going to let you on a little secret. It's not because I'm in high demand or anything, but there's been a few people that have asked me to consider being their pastor. Not really since I've been here, but before they did. And you know what impressed me about those churches? The first question they asked, it wasn't anything about how many churches I'd led or any of my stats. It was, well, what do you believe about the Bible? Well, tell us about your love of Christ. Tell us how you study. Tell us how you prepare. That shows me that church was looking for somebody that was a man after God's own heart. They didn't look and say, oh, you went to the Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville. You're in. They said, tell us about your heart. You see, that's what we need to do. We have to look at the heart. But not only his choice is surprising in its receptions as well. I want you to notice that how this is received. This choice is so surprising. I want you to see how Jesse, who I'm sure was a fine father, I want you to see how he refers to David. In verse 10, and again, Jesse made 7 sons to pass before Samuel, and Samuel said unto Jesse, the Lord hath not chosen these. And Samuel said unto Jesse, are here all thy children? And he said, listen, there remaineth yet the youngest. He doesn't even call him by name. As the baby of the family, I would be used to this. I think that's why they named me David. They would just say, he's the baby. I thought my name was Hey You, turn the TV up, and baby until I was like 16. I was like, oh, I got a name. It's David. I want you to see how he's received. It's surprising in its reception, even by Jesse. Jesse doesn't even refer to his youngest son as David. He says the youngest. And what's the youngest doing? He's just out tending sheep. He's no one important. He's just the baby of the family. We just left him out there because we didn't think you would even want to look at him or see him or talk to him. He would be underfoot. He would be in the way. He's not impressive like these other ones. His name is David. You know what his name means? Beloved. I think it's great that these others who had these big, powerful, mighty names were rejected, but the one that was beloved, the one that was in the fields, he was the one God chose. His name implies beloved, not only beloved to his mother and his father, but beloved to God. The youngest. His reception is surprising. I want you to see what it said in verse 11. And Samuel said unto Jesse, are there any other children? He said, there remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. In other words, nothing's going to happen until he shows up. God's told me he's going to choose a king, and you only got one son left. We ain't sitting down till he shows up. No doubt the prophet already thought, here comes the king. Because God had already told him, you're going to anoint a king today of the house of Jesse. Jesse only had so many sons. The last son was coming. The prophet said, nobody sits down till the king shows up. And then verse 12, and he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy. That means he was kind of red-faced. And he was with all of beautiful countenance and goodly to look at. He was a good-looking kid, but not the kind of kid that you would look at and think he was devastatingly handsome, not like the other ones. He was just cute. He was cute to look at. He was ruddy and all. He was beautiful. So Samuel rose up, and the Lord said, arise and anoint him, for it is he. You see, we have to be careful how we assess those around us. We look at people tonight and we think we know who God will use and what he will do with them. You don't know. There was a man that when I was growing up, he sat right back there where Miss Lori's sitting in the sound booth at Salem Baptist Church. He sat right back there. I remember whenever we would go to Salem Baptist Church and we would visit there when I was a boy in their old building, their sound booth would have been where our nursery is. And I remember him sitting right in there. And you would see a shadow through the window. I remember when he was dating his wife, because you would look back and you would see his wife's shadow sitting beside him when they were dating in the window. And I'd always think, that doesn't seem right. And then when my father went there to pastor, he was sitting right there. You know what happened to that man when he got in his late 40s? He surrendered to preach, and he became a wonderful, amazing, godly pastor. Matter of fact, he just gave up pastoring not too long ago. You all prayed for him. His name is Johnny Liebrook. Pastor Liebrook, when I was growing up, he was just John. John in the sound booth. He would wear his good Wranglers and his clean boots and his most pressed button up to church, you know. Just a guy, one of the bros. Guess what? People will look at him and say, Johnny's just going to be in that sound booth the rest of his life. He went and became one of the greatest pastors Emmanuel Baptist Church has ever had. Brought the church from the brink of despair to prosperous and amazing. You see, God's choices are surprising, but God's choices are also specific. God had a specific plan in mind. He sent Samuel to a specific town, to a specific family, with a specific person, with a specific purpose, and he was there to choose a specific king. God chooses those who are ready. You want to know who God chooses, how God chose him to be king, and he didn't choose his brothers. He chooses those who are ready. Look with me in verse 11. Verse 11 says this, and Samuel said unto Jesse, are here all thy children? And he said, there remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, send and fetch him, for we will not sit down until he cometh hither. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, arise and anoint him, for this is he. God chooses those who are ready. How do I know David was ready from that verse? Look with me, if you would, in verse 5. Verse 5 says this. The prophet comes to town, remember, and he's got a cow. They said, are you here to hurt us, or you come peaceably? Verse 5, and he said, the prophet said, I come peaceably. I am come to sacrifice unto the Lord. sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his sons and called them to the sacrifice. The entire town of Bethlehem had to be sanctified. They had to be purified. They had to be ready to worship God. Jesse's sons, every one of them, had to be sanctified, had to be purified, had to be ready to worship God. What does sanctified means? It means that they're set apart. It means that they get ready to sacrifice, to worship God. Guess what? David just walked in. What does that tell you? David was already sanctified when he came out of the sheep pasture. David didn't have to come in and be sanctified to stand before the prophet. He was already sanctified. His heart was already pure. He was already in a state of grace. He was already praying. He was already seeking God. He was already a man after God's own heart. Even as a boy, he was already sanctified. Everybody else in Bethlehem had to be sanctified to sacrifice to God, but David just showed up already sanctified. God chooses those who are ready, with a ready heart, ready to worship, ready to serve, ready to do what is expected of them. David is a picture of that believer who keeps his heart in a state of readiness at all times. Here am I, send me. David was ready. Whenever he was there watching the sheep and they went and got him, David didn't complain. He didn't say, why do I have to go meet the prophet? Does he come peaceably? He wasn't scared of him. He was the man of God. He said, all right, I'll go. I'll leave my sheep. He was ready. He didn't have to brush his teeth, comb his hair. He just showed up as he was. Why did he show up as he was? Because he was ready when he got there. God chooses those who are reliable. I want you to see what happens exactly right after the prophet anoints David to be king. Look with me in verse 19. What's it say? Wherefore Saul sent a messenger to Jesse and said, send me David thy son, which is with the sheep. What does that tell you what happened? Right after David met the prophet of God, and right after the prophet of God looked at him and he said, get down, and he dumped a bunch of oil on his head. He says, you're the next king of Israel. Congratulations. He stood up, he shook his hand, smacked him on the back. What did he do? He went right back to keeping sheep. If somebody came and told you were the next king of anything, you would quit your job. You know those people, you ever work with people, they're like, if I won the Powerball tomorrow, I'd come to work. I don't gamble. But I look at them and I say, listen, if somebody gave me $100 million, I would not come back to work. David did. He won better than the lottery. He was the next appointed king of Israel, but he was so reliable, the only thing he could think to do was go right back to doing what God had already told him to do in the first place, to go and be a shepherd. He was reliable. God chooses those who are reliable. Why did God put Johnny Labrook in a pulpit at Emmanuel Baptist Church? Because he was reliable. Because he was at the sound booth every time the doors were open. Because when there was revival, he was there. When there was Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, he was there. Did he stand up and say much? No, but he was there. He was reliable. He never missed. He was always there. He was always fixing. He was always reliable. And then God said, that's who I want up in that pulpit over on Crane Creek, West Virginia. Reliable. What does God mean when he says, you have been faithful over a few things, I want to make you ruler over many things? I love the story that Big John Smith told one time when I was at a pastor's meeting. He's got a big ditch, big slush pond there on the property of Taze Valley Baptist Church. And it's just runoff water. It's a big mud hole. He gets all these preacher boys that come there to intern with him. You know what the first thing he has them do? Go and get that slush pond and clean it out. They'll show up in their three-piece suits ready to serve with Big John Smith. What does he do? Puts them in the mud. Why? I never forget what he said. He said, if you're too good to get in the mud, you're not good enough to get behind my pulpit. Reliable. God chooses those who are reliable, who show up day in and day out and do their job. They put their head down when it's hard and they do their job. We find out later as David's talking before he goes to kill Goliath. He says, when the lion came, I killed him. When the bear came, I killed him. The lion and the bear came and I killed him. So he wasn't worried about the giant. Why? Because God was always taking care of him, and he was reliable to fight any foe that stood before him through the power of God. So when Goliath was standing there, he was just another fool to fall. People want to slay giants, but they don't want to fight lions and bears. You'll never kill giants if you aren't reliable when the lions and the bears show up. When the giants come, you'll run like the rest of the children of Israel did. God chooses those who are reliable. God chooses those who are redeemed. He chooses those who are redeemed. We find out that David is redeemed. Psalms 19. He talks about how he's witnessed God's tender care of his people and his own relationship to his flock. He always refers to sheep keeping in the Psalms. In Psalms 23, it's evident that he's redeemed when he talks about how the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He leadeth me to lie down in green pastures. He knows he's redeemed. He's a redeemed child of God. That's who God chooses. You see, here's the point. God calls those who know him. He chooses the vessels from among his redeemed ones. Those who know him in a faith relationship will have clean lives, who are ready, reliable, and available. Those are the candidates that God chooses to use. His brothers did not meet this criteria. When the Bible tells us that David is a man after God's own heart, that does not imply that he was perfect, because all you have to do is read the Bible to know he's not perfect. He's never been perfect, and he never will be perfect until he got to heaven. But he was ready and reliable and redeemed, and his heart was that to do what God told him to do. God anointed him to be king of Israel through the prophet. He went right back to taking care of those stinky, dumb sheep. And then in the field where we read, it said they went and got him from the field. Saul, the man who God had rejected, said, go fetch that boy. He can sing. He's a cute kid. He can play the harp, because Saul would go crazy. And he needed somebody, music soothes the savage beast. Music soothes the savage king. He called for David to come and play his harp whenever he would be disquieted within his heart. And here is David, this ready, reliable, redeemed servant of God, who knew that Saul was sitting on the throne that belonged to him, and he still humbly sat at his feet and played his harp and sang songs to him. Solomon might have been the wisest king that Israel ever knew, and the richest, but make no mistake about it, David was the greatest. When Jesus Christ returns and he sits on the throne in New Jerusalem, he will sit on the throne of David, not Solomon. David. Why? Because he was a man after God's own heart. Never perfect, but always seeking the perfect will of God in his life. Always faithful. And even when he falters, which we'll look at too, you can't look at David without looking at how terrible of things he did. Even when he falters, he has the spirit to know that the only way to make things right is to beg God for forgiveness. Why? Because he's a man after God's own heart. Because he wants to please God so bad. And when he fails, it kills him. Because he realizes how he has failed his Father in heaven. Every head bowed and every eye closed. I'm looking forward to David. A wise pastor once told me I was a rebellious Christian. Didn't exemplify all the great aspects of David. I exemplified all the bad. I was not a great Christian. I was away from God. Wise pastor once told me when I rededicated my life to God, he said, you need to become an expert in the life of King David. You need to understand why he was chosen, how he was chosen, why he fell away from that calling, and how he got back to it. That'll make you a better Christian. And I'll tell you what, it did. It did. It made me want to be more like King David. God will choose you to do great and mighty things in spite of the fact that no one else thinks you can do them. Because God doesn't look on the outward man. God looks on the heart. In spite of the fact that you're the run of the litter that takes care of the sheep, God will use you to do amazing things because he knows it doesn't really matter how amazing you are. It's all relying on how amazing he is. and where your heart is in seeking him. Dear God, I come to you and I thank you so much for this evening. God, I thank you for the lessons learned from David. God, I pray that we'll get in your word on these Wednesday nights and look at this boy. He's still a boy. God, as he grows into a man that's a warrior, that's a poet, and that is eventually the king. God, I pray that we will have a heart like David, a heart that is following after you, a man after or a woman after God's own heart. God, that we'll seek you. God, that we will be ready. God, that we're reliable. And God, I pray everyone here is redeemed tonight. God, if there is any lost soul that is here, I pray they'll be saved before it's too late.